When you start Death Must Die for the first time, it begins by dumping you right into the action. You'll see a quick pop-up teaching you the basics of the game's controls, and yes, it does support arrow keys by default if you don't like WASD. From there, you have to get to attacking enemies, which can be done at any time. However, it slows down your movement, which leads to the gameplay feeling quite a lot more tactical. You move most quickly when you aren't attacking, but you often need to attack to deal damage. And so you kind of play this cat and mouse game, dodging enemies, attacking them, or maybe going off to get power-ups. As you kill enemies, you get gems. Yep, it's a bullet heaven game, this is to be expected. Once you level up, you get a boon or buff from various gods. These can be considered in several broad categories, like buffs on yourself, spells which auto-cast, or modifications to your dash or auto-attack. They come in several rarities, starting from novice and going all the way up to the ultra-rare legendary. You can also level them up to enhance their effects. Sometimes this just increases the numbers, other times it adds interesting effects, like additional projectiles or more jumps. And every few minutes there's going to be a timed event, either a gauntlet-style event where enemies attempt to swarm you, or a boss battle, some of which can be quite challenging, others of which feel fairly trivial. So your experience in some of these is going to depend on your character, your build, and how well the run's been going. If you make it to 20 minutes, fighting through various waves of enemies, you get to defeat the final boss and win for now. But here's where things get really interesting. After you defeat bosses, or as random drops out in the world, you get loot. And loot is an ARPG-style meta progression. Yes, that's right, instead of most other Bullet Heaven games where your meta progression comes in the form of 40% increased damage, or +1 revive, this time you get an epic sword of smiting, or in some cases, a charm that summons a literal dragon. But most of your early runs won't be about collecting that epic loot, because you need to balance killing enemies early on with getting the various power-ups around the map. Some of the more common ones give you a relatively small bonus, like 8% increased damage. But some of the larger ones give you build-defining effects, like losing a small amount of life per second, but gaining life on hit. These can entirely make or break your run. And so, early on when you don't have much gear, you're probably going to find yourself losing a fair bit. But don't worry, if you die along the way, you're going to be unlocking new characters and making progress as you go. Plus, if you do manage to win and defeat the boss, you'll be able to customize the difficulty, going from difficulty 0, the default, all the way up to difficulty 30, and getting increased drops for your time. And if this game ends up looking interesting to you and you plan to pick it up for yourself, do be sure to get subscribed, leave a like while you're down there, because I'm going to be covering all the basics in a beginner's guide which should be out soon. And if it's already out, hey, you'll find it down in the description below, assuming that I remember. With the basics out of the way, let's take a look at Death Must Die's mechanics, starting with the characters. You begin by playing Averon the Knight. He's not going to be the fastest, and he may not even be the strongest. He's absolutely the most well-armored, and therefore reliable. Admittedly, a lot of that is just flavor text, as the gear you're wearing and how you build the character matters a lot more, but he does wear heavy armor, so along with Krant, he does have access to the most baseline defenses. Now, the second character you unlock is Maris the Sorceress. She's an elf who has a healthy obsession with fire, like we all do. And as the game's sole ranged character, playing her feels extremely different from anyone else. Then you have Nixie, the game's assassin edgelord, who is probably my least favorite personality-wise, but she is pretty darn good at stabbing and can be one of the most effective characters at taking down bosses, at least right now in the early access. Then there's Krant, big guy with a weapon. If you want to be in the enemy's face, his whirlwind's gonna make it easy to do so. He is the only melee character with 360 degrees of AoE by default. And then, last but certainly not least, is Scotty, the medium armor-wearing character, and the warrior. She feels like the most balanced out of all of them. Wearing medium armor, she has a fair bit of defense, but also can put out surprising amounts of damage. In addition to the character, you can also choose their sign. These are unlocked by completing certain achievements. Once you do, you'll get a series of bonuses when you level up. For example, Sign of a Chosen One on Averon. Whenever you take damage, you become invulnerable for 3 seconds, but it can occur more than once every 10 seconds. This is super overpowered if you're only getting hit once, but not very useful if you're getting mobbed and overwhelmed. On the other hand, his Sign of a Hero gives you up to 170% attack damage by level 30, which gives him a prodigious DPS output equal to any of the other characters. On the other hand, Maris's Sign of the Helper completely changes your gameplay. Your missiles aim towards enemies and you have much higher attack damage. This takes her from an AoE-focused burst mage to a single target boss killer, and significantly increases her damage output, especially if you're able to scale additional projectiles. Scotty, on the other hand, is often seen as the most beginner-friendly character because her Sign of the Apprentice gives +1 level to a random skill for every 2 levels you gain, effectively making leveling up 50% more effective. This is a really strong way to get a lot of high-level boons and therefore a lot of character power. And in fact, this was one of the ways that I cheesed an early win, though it wasn't my first win in this case. But swapping between characters isn't the only thing you're going to be doing in town, because like I mentioned, gear is an important part of your meta progression, and you're going to be managing it at the shop and storing it in your stash. As you can see, I've got a mutating ametrine, which gives 24% more skill level up offers. I'd want to wear this if I wanted my current skills to level up more, rather than being offered new ones or possibly increasing their rarity. You can have a variety of effect. Weapons tend to have damage, boots tend to have movement speed, gloves tend to have shard pull radius, thus increasing your AoE, and sometimes you'll find really rare, unique items that have completely different effects, like the Belt of Bob that gives you 50 armor, which is incredibly handy for Maris, as she's a light armor character who doesn't get access to much armor rating elsewhere. As you can see, the armor on her Belt of Bob is pretty much the same as, if not more than, the rest of her gear combined. And then you come over here to store stuff in your stash. You also get fun little trophies from the enemies you've defeated that are scattered around your hideout. Now, after you've beaten the final boss at least once, you'll unlock the Star Crux. This is where you can make the game much harder, or potentially impossible for yourself, in exchange for better drops. So, after leveling up, Crom here is offering me one of his blessings. I can choose Rampaging Strike, Blades, or War Pact. War Pact is a buff that increases my damage dealt versus enemy barriers, the blue shield that protects their health. Blades is an auto-cast spell. What this will do is, every 7.4 seconds, spawn a Beyblade that tries to slice enemies to pieces. And Rampaging Strike enhances my auto attack, causing me to gain 3 projectiles, 1 projectile pierce, all the stats that you see. Now on the right, these are my Dice of Fate. You can have up to 3 different types, though currently I only have 2 of them. Banish dice allow me to select a power and prevent it from ever showing up again. So if I say I don't want to see War Pact, then I can banish it. Reroll dice will reroll all the blessings, but only give you options from the current god. So I'd only get options from Crom here. And as you can see, I now have an Adept Rampaging Strike, Charge, which replaces my dash, or Chains of War, that allows me to roleplay as Kratos and spin chains around myself. If I had an Alteration dice, I could choose to change the god offering me a blessing. But for now, I think I'll just go with Rampaging Strike. If I level up again, Crom might bless me, or I might be able to interact with a different god. If Crom does bless me, then much like in Hades, I could choose to either upgrade one of my existing blessings, or alternatively, instead of upgrading an existing blessing, I could choose a new one, and occasionally I'll be offered the ability to change the rarity. So instead of it being a novice, it would go from novice to adept, or in this case, adept would be tiered up as well. All right, I grab Rampaging Strike, and now when I attack, you can see I have multiple red fireballs. Something else that's a really important part of a gameplay loop in Death Must Die is these power-ups around the map. The Obelisk of Sanctuary renders you immune to all damage. Alms, on the other hand, gives you a good omen and increases your luck. Luck is a stat that affects all sorts of proc rates. Now I've encountered winter, and so I get offered completely new boons. But I'm going to reroll and try to get something a little bit better, maybe a higher rarity boon. I've got plenty of dice here. A lot of your early game is about not only maximizing your experience, but also going around and collecting all the shrines on the map. If you don't need the experience right now, don't worry too much about getting out of range, because eventually you will be able to find a magnet shrine that allows you to pull things even from a great range. Just keep in mind that if you're not collecting it immediately, you are going to be behind in levels, and if you fall too far behind, you could easily be overwhelmed. Now, if you're lucky, you'll see this symbol here and get the little boot above your head. That means you have a stamina shrine. With a stamina shrine, there's no penalty for attacking while you move, which means you get to put out significant amounts of damage with no cost. And there we go, I found the magnet shrine. I also defeated a mini-boss and encountered Lady Justice. Well, this is quite a good day. Again, I'll reroll, try to get something a little bit rarer, like this Divine Shield that protects me from all damage for one hit. I'll also pick up the chest from a mini-boss. This gives you a free level up, and like I mentioned earlier, I'm able to upgrade my Blight from Adept to Expert, so I'll go ahead and do that. Now, not every interactable on the map is made equal. While a lot of them are clicked once just to get some general buffs, something like the Gremlin Root House gives you a choice. I can either accept a teacup of coffee, healing 25 life and gaining attack speed and movement speed for 60 seconds, so if something big like a boss battle's coming up, I might want this. Or I can accept the huge wheel of cheese to gain permanent life and max life, or I can go for tiny biscuits, which reduces my dash cooldown by a little teeny bit. Most of the time, this will be pretty useless. Some of the time, this is going to be the difference between life and death. And so for now, I'll accept a teacup of coffee because that sounds great right about now. And this is the first boss battle against the Baron's right hand and the Baron's left hand. These gargoyles make for a formidable tag team, but what I'm doing is trying to avoid all of their attacks as much as possible while staying at a safe distance. Most of the time I'm using my evade, sometimes I'm just walking out of things, since the triple spike attack in particular is fairly easy to walk out of due to its pretty large radius dead zone. And I did mess up a couple times, but luckily my defensive stat evasion procced once and I had a Divine Shield for another. And since the Divine Shield came back, I was easily able to take out the first gargoyle. After one's down, not only do you get an item and a free level up, but the others shouldn't be too much of a challenge to finish off. Though I find the Baron's left hand tends to stay at range more, so quite often he does live longer than the Baron's right hand. Now, as you may have noticed, things get kind of hectic in gameplay, and it might look like melee characters would have a significant disadvantage. A couple things to keep in mind. Number one, I'm playing on the hardest version of the game currently available in early access. And number two, by cleverly attacking, you're able to negate most ranged enemy abilities. Because you see, projectiles in Death Must Die are attackable, and your attacks, including on melee characters, can destroy them. So while I would say that Maris is slightly easier to get the hang of the game with, overall, when well played, all the melee characters can shine as well. What really sets Death Must Die apart from all other Bullet Heaven games, though, is the ARPG style meta progression, and the fact that the items are genuinely impactful. If you've ever played an ARPG, you know how important it is to make a build. Now, part of that is acquiring a bunch of blessings that have good synergy. This can either be because they're from the same god, such as freezing enemies with winter and then doing more damage to frozen enemies with winter, or across different gods, such as using Time's ability to pull things in and group them up, then nuke them with one of Summer's AoE spells, or because it synergizes with your build and your items. So let's take a look at some of the stuff that I'm wearing on Maris. For example, I have a relic that gives me an Onyx Dragon, and this thing is absolutely awesome in the early game. Not only does it kill a ton of stuff, allowing me to move around, but it does a pretty decent amount of damage to the early elites. Similarly, my unique Belt of Bob gives me 50 armor, a stat that normally I wouldn't have good access to. Or in the case of the Divine Shirt of Vigor, I gain a revival. That's right, I can die and come back to life. Unfortunately, the other stats on it aren't quite ideal, as I'd really like a little bit more evasion so that I die less often. Now, just looking at some stuff in my inventory, these Greeting Gloves of Magnetism would give me shard, pull area, and gold gain. And this Banishing Rod of Power is a staff with decent DPS, it gives passive EXP gain, a lot of banished die, and a chance to stun enemies on hit. These secondary effects, such as stunning enemies on hit, can be incredibly powerful, and when you get an item like this, you should absolutely experiment with it. I think the thing that keeps me coming back, even after 30 hours, is the fact that I can still experiment with different builds by farming up perfect items. But what does it feel like to play Death Must Die? Well, you can kind of think of it like vampire survivors had a child with Hades, but secretly Diablo's the father. I'll let you figure out who's who in that relationship. The simple pixel art makes the red circle telegraphs quite easy to see, at least most of the time. As you could probably tell from some of the earlier gameplay, as it gets faster and as you get more stuff, sometimes you're the problem and you can't see the screen because of something you're doing. Being able to auto-attack while moving gives the game a surprising amount of fluidity, but because you lose move speed when auto-attacking, it's going to feel sluggish if you just turn on auto-attack and then forget about it. This also makes it much harder to dodge, because you can't guarantee the direction in which you're attacking, so you can't guarantee that you're destroying enemy projectiles. So a little bit of careful use of manually attacking can often be the difference between success and failure, especially in the late game. And because the boss mechanics are well telegraphed, such as with the twin gargoyles, you kind of get into a pattern. Dodge the triple prong attack, dash the charge, dodge out of a prong, profit. And as you get to ramp up your build, especially with a lot of items, the gameplay gets quite fast. Remember, the more enemies you kill, the more experience you're going to be getting, so be sure to invest into those AoEs early and often. Now, the gods are fully voice acted, which is quite nice. And I'll just leave a clip of one of the interactions here.
In all honesty, I'd have already grown tired of this. You have some resilience, pal.
The normal gameplay is also quite satisfying. There's little clinks and tinks when you hit armor, plus a satisfying whoosh as you're immolating multiple enemies with your various destructive abilities. Now, the characters aren't voice acted, which is great, because the voice lines are certainly something. For me, this was a major source of ludonarrative dissonance, where you're trying to battle against death, aided by the gods themselves. And here Nixie's practically saying ooh every 5 minutes. Yeah, I didn't really want to play Grimdark Fantasy Survivor E-Girl edition. I'd rather she just gets back to stabbing stuff, or, I don't know, she could at least be an edge lady like most rogues in most other games. That said, the character dialogue is really my only major complaint about the game, and I've managed to put together some pretty awesome builds that crushed absolutely everything, even going up to difficulty 10 or 15. The ARPG aspects add a lot to the meta progression, where I don't just max out my bonuses and go, well, I'm done. Instead, not only do I get to specialize my characters, but I can keep additional gear sets and constantly go back to farm other items because I'm like, hey, what if instead of being a spell damage build, I was an auto-trigger Maris? And I did a lot of auto-attack stuff. And then I can farm out the gear for that and build out the character, see how it plays, hopefully get the god boons most of the time, don't get the god blessings, and then be sad about it. Which is probably why, even though Death Must Die has been out for less than a week, I've already played it for 30 hours. Oh, and by the way, the game's about $10 or under, so it's not too expensive. Plus, the devs are actively improving things. About 3 days into the early access, there was a major patch that addressed a lot of my concerns, such as healing not being too good, gem high falling off immediately, and a lot of other enhancements to the various pickups around the map. So even as is, I'd say the game's very fun, and it's only going to get better from here. But like always with early access games, buy it for what it is right now, don't buy it for what it may be. But don't just take my word for it, let's see what other people have to say about Death Must Die. A breath of fresh air in the genre where almost every game felt the same. Great content, and finally can start grinding again after the great demo. Excited for what's coming next, keep up the good work, team. This game is a really nice mix of Hades and Bullet Heaven. It combines the craziness that can appear in Bullet Heaven while maintaining a sense of skill and control amazingly well, but has the fun upgrade system similar to the gods in Hades, and I love it. Then number 3, This game reminds me of my mother's cooking. It's good, but it's only getting better with time. And I can't agree more. I already think the game's good right now, but I do expect that it's going to get better. For example, we can enter into the first zone of the game, the outer ring of, I guess, hell? But we don't know what's coming in the second or third rings, because I'm guessing that much like Hades, it's going to follow a 3 or 4 act setup. And at the end, you're going to actually kill death, something you can't do right now, so I guess he gets a bunch of free wins on us. I also noticed that all the items I'm getting are tier 1, so that implies there's going to be tier 2, which could have higher stat rolls or even crazier affixes. And who knows, right now there's 5 characters with several signs each, and a good smattering of gods, but in the future we could see more gods, more characters, or more signs, which could lead to a truly mind-blowing combination of builds which would certainly make every run feel a lot more unique. And so personally, I'm really looking forward to Death Must Die. Now, if you like Bullet Heaven games, I can also recommend checking out Deep Rock Galactic Survivors, another upcoming Bullet Heaven that does different things to change up the genre, and I'm quite excited for it. Or if you like indie ARPGs, then you can check out my video on Ghostlure, another ARPG that I checked out, which is absolutely excellent. Links to both of those will be up in the card and down below. But now I'm curious, what do you think of Death Must Die, and are you planning to play it? Let me know down in the comments. And if you don't plan to play it, then let me know what your favorite ARPG or Bullet Heaven game is. With that said, thanks for watching, and a special thanks to my patrons and channel members for the continued support. Link to support is down below. And for now, I need to get back to defeating difficulty 30 Dracula. But hopefully I'll see you again sometime soon.